We're in my chapter, And Justice for All, which, if you listen to metal music or Metallica, you get the reference, but it's also because the Torah portion for this week is called Shoftim, Judges, and it's also a wink to my friend Fabian, who gives the most epic Dvar Torahs ever. And they usually involve fire, heavy metal, references to spirit animals, powers that exist within each element by the Shefa, the flow of the Shekhinah, and he's just epic. So when I thought of a title for this, for Shoftim, for Judges for this week, I thought of And Justice for All, Metallica, and thinking of Fabian. So now to the words behind. So much anxiety is brought on by thinking we won't receive what's just. Of course, everyone's view of their own justice looks different, but the idea of not receiving what we think we deserve, whether from a person or the universe, creates this division and distancing in our relationships with others, with ourselves, and the entirety of life. Justice brings peace, but only when judgment, when gvura, which is on the left side, is balanced with the proper amount of mercy, which ties to or is correlated with chesed, which is on the right side. When this is done, it creates tiferet, which is harmony, right? So this talking about the tree of life, the sfirot. So Ruth Bader Ginsberg, she has a book called Justice, Justice, Thou Shalt Pursue, a life's work fighting for a more perfect union. So this is pulled from this Torah portion where it's written justice, justice you shall pursue. And in Hebrew, for judges, Shoftim, RGB is known as this epic example of one. So she was loved and celebrated for her work she did as a lawyer and activist in trying to create a broader notion of justice in America. A Jew herself, her work clearly drew from the fundamental Torah value we find in this pasuk, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, l'man techiyeh. So justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. So there's always this idea of Israel as this promised land that is already there, and we need to take possession of it. So it's waiting for us, and we need to reach the promised land. So it's all talking about how do we reach this thing that is already waiting for us, just as blessings are waiting for us, but we have to perfect our keli so that we could actually hold the blessing, so that it just doesn't flow and leave, but that we could hold it. So it's this idea of Yisrael, from Yaakov, from Jacob, moving from the Ekev, moving from the heel, where he came out holding Esav, and reaching toward the Rosh, so going from just Yaakov to being renamed Israel, which is basically showing this transformation for himself on a personal level, but also for all of us to reach from the Ekev, or as Drake says, from the bottom, started at the bottom, now we're here. So like starting at the bottom, the Ekev, and then reaching the top, and then reaching this promised land. What is basically how we see Israel within the Torah. So Rashi says that the justice in this pasuk, in this verse that we just read, refers specifically to appointing worthy judges, and explains that the institution of justice will give the Jewish nation the merit to stay alive and settle in the promised land. As a people, we literally reach the land by virtue of our commitment to justice. But beyond the story of the Jews in the desert, this pasuk, this verse, teaches how each of us can reach our own promised land and find personal redemption. Every day, we see and hear people fighting, building walls with their words, forming judgments toward other people that can change the way they can or can't exist together. But when people put aside their egos and speak peace into existence, choosing to extend humane compassion to each other, then they can reunite and coexist in peace. It's only through peace that blessings can flow freely. The Zohar teaches by the way one handles anger, one can recognize who one is. If a person guards one's soul at a moment of anger and does not allow one's soul to be torn from its place, this is a person who is as they should be. This is a complete person. So shalom and shalem are connected. Shalom being peace, shalem being a whole, complete person, as we're talking about in the Zohar here. So we are only complete when we are at peace in both our inner and outer worlds. As we reveal the divine light that is so often concealed in this world in anticipation of the final redemption, we have to pursue justice and peace as much as we can. We have to choose to be slow to anger, quick to show love, and give of ourselves, as it says in Isaiah, "Open up, O gates, that a righteous nation may enter." One lesson to be learned from Ginsburg through her relationship with her colleague on the Supreme Court Antonin Scalia is how they exemplified putting aside their egos, building a personal relationship based on humane compassion, even when they disagreed vehemently in their views of justice. The two Supreme Court justices' views could not have been more at odds, but their respect for each other remained intact for decades. Just hearing how they would disagree, but talk through their disagreements, was inspiring. When Ginsberg would hear Scalia's finding many faults in his views, she would still say, "He said it in an absolutely captivating way." And when the tables returned, Scalia would share what's not to like except her views on the law. When Ginsberg wrote the High Court's majority opinion striking down the Virginia Military Institute's ban on admitting women, Scalia showed her a draft of his dissent. She recalls it was a zinger, filled with disdainful footnotes, but that she was glad to have extra days to adjust the court's opinion. My final draft was much more improved, thanks to Justice Scalia's searing criticism. The reason people praise their relationship so much is that it seems as a people we are moving further and further away from such a rapport. The Talmud, the elaborate explanation and commentary on the Mishna, is based on opposing opinions and respect. For 3 centuries, after the redaction and editing of the Mishnah, the later sages called Amoraim and their students discussed and analyzed the Mishnah. Their questions, discussions, and solutions comprise the Talmud, the Gemara. If you look at a page of the Talmud, on either side of the ancient arguments of the Amoraim, scholars of the oral Torah in Israel and Babylon until the end of the 5th century CE, you find more opposing views, those of the medieval commentators, Rashi on the right, and Tosafot on the left. Judaism from antiquity to now is steeped in teachings and process of learning the Talmud. Literally thousands and thousands of Jews and lots of law students are lovingly arguing with each other at this moment, using the Talmud as the catalyst for diving deeper into endless hypothetical scenarios connected to the morality of Jewish law and ritual. But as a modern Western culture and people, we seem to be moving away from this embrace of respectful conflict, something Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff discuss in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. Their description of the book hits the nail on the head, that surrounding oneself with people that share your view is detrimental to self-growth. The book is a timely investigation into the safety culture on campus and the dangers it opposes to free speech, mental health, education, and ultimately democracy. The generation now coming of age has been taught 3 great untruths. Their feelings are always right. They should avoid pain and discomfort, and they should look for faults in others and not themselves. These 3 great untruths are part of a larger philosophy that sees young people as fragile creatures who must be protected and supervised by adults. But despite the good intentions of the adults who impart them, the great untruths are harming kids by teaching them the opposite of ancient wisdom and the opposite of modern psychological findings on grit, growth, and anti-fragility. In a TED Talk that is just as relevant today as it was right after the Biden-Trump election, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs Zatzal speaks on how we can face the future without fear together. He begins by saying, "We've seen divisive elections, divided societies, and the growth of extremism, all fueled by anxiety and uncertainty. Is there something we can do, each of us, to be able to face the future without fear?" He goes on to say it's the people not like us that make us grow, and shares 3 specific ways we can move from the politics of me to the politics of all of us together. The part that stuck out the most to me, especially keeping in mind this mission of Light of the Infinite, this book series that I wrote, and Don't Block Your Blessings, is his simple suggestion, which he says might change your life, and it might just help to begin to change the world. Do a search and replace operation on the text of your mind. Wherever you encounter the word self, substitute the word other. So instead of self-help, other help. Instead of self-esteem, other esteem. And if you do that, you will begin to feel the power of what, for me, is one of the most moving sentences in all religious literature. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. We can face any future without fear, so long as we know we will not face it alone. So for the sake of the future you, together let us strengthen the future us. These lessons are all steeped in justice, peace, focusing on being of service to others. The danger is when we focus on ourselves and our own needs to the detriment of others, which is always in reality a detriment to ourselves. This is also to illustrate that, as we say in hip-hop, there's rules to this, and an expletive. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks articulates in Devarim, as a whole, establishes the Jewish nation as a moral and just society. Deuteronomy is, in essence, a program for the creation of a moral society in which righteousness is the responsibility of all. The good society was to be within the limits of the world as it was 33 centuries ago, an inclusive, if not an entirely egalitarian one. Time and again we are told that society must embrace the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the Levite, people without independent status or means. It is to be one nation under God. Many of us have heard the saying. So, by the way, just for whoever just joined now, and you're welcome and thank you for joining, this is my 5th book, so number 5 in the Light of the Infinite series. This is Emanations of Illumination. We're on page 89. The chapter is And Justice for All, Shoftim. So I try to bring in pop culture sometimes, movie or song lyrics, or just different stories that I was going through at the time when I was writing it, and then bring in Chassidut and Kabbalah around the Torah portions. And so it parallels its 5 books that parallel the 5 books of the Torah. So many of us have heard the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Not many will hear this phrase and have absolutely by MF Doom playing in their heads, but I do. The way that the Torah instructs justice is a way to ensure that no one individual can claim absolute power. The root of the statement by Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely, was borrowed by William Pitt, the Elder, British Prime Minister, 1766 to 1778. Who had expressed the idea differently. In 1770, Pitt said the House of the Lords, unlimited power is apt to corrupt the minds of those who possess it. In the book of Devarim, we are reminded why the events that took place in the book of Shemot were necessary. The lessons learned as slaves in Egypt, as people without justice, peace, or any sort of rights, instilled in us what it meant to be the other, to be strangers in a strange land. This experience creates the foundational empathy that informs the Torah's vision of a good society based on collective responsibility. As a fan of Justin Bieber's music, I can't pretend that writing a chapter on justice doesn't make his 6th studio album pop into my head. His intention with that album was his attempt to play a small part in discussing what justice looks like in the year following the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many more Black Americans, which fueled protests and widespread conversations about systemic racism. Bieber expressed that, I know that I cannot simply solve injustice by making music, but I do know that if we all do our part by using our gifts to serve this planet and each other, that we are that much closer to being united. I want to continue the conversation of what justice looks like so we can continue to heal. As we covered in the chapter, Only God Could Judge Me, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that in order to experience a taste of the Ora Ganuz, the hidden light, one must elevate the aspect of fear to its source. Fear is elevated within the aspect of judgment, as it's written in Mishle and Proverbs. King Solomon, through judgment, the king will establish the land. And land corresponds to fear, as it says in Tehillim, in Psalms. The earth feared, and later he conducted his affairs with judgment. One must judge and evaluate all their actions so that they can be elevated on high. In this world, we see that when judgment is enacted, others respect the righteousness of the law and fear it, awoken by their own desire to not fall victim to similar judgments. Jumping earlier into Tehillim and further into the lesson of Azamra, it says, and yet in a little bit the sinner is gone. You will contemplate his place, but he will not be there. This correlates to the famous lesson in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, find yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and judge every person favorably. This practice of rectifying judgment is done by finding the good points in yourself. When you do that, you take away the bad from others and from yourself, and when that becomes second nature, you can reach a level where you don't see bad. This is what it means when it says in Tehillim, in Psalms, that the sinner is gone. You have brought yourself and the other to a place of kulotov, to a place of all good. You're removing them from a place that you've put them in, that they could feel in this bad place, that you're bringing negative energy into that space. And when you judge favorably, you're removing them from that space. And if you learn Likutei Moran, which is lesson 282, but if you jump into Likutei Halachot Rav Natan, then you're really jumping further into this Azamra lesson. Which book are you reading? Where did you buy it? your kippah. Both on Amazon, actually. So I'm reading my book. This is the 5th. This is Light of the Infinite, Emanations of Illumination. It's the 5th book in the Light of the Infinite series. So you can get it on Amazon. Just put in my name, which is above, Erez Safar. And then my kippah I also got on Amazon. And you can just put in like Breslov kippah or Nanach kippah or something like that, and it'll ship within a couple days. So a world without justice is a fractured world, while a world concerned with justice and peace is its focus is a world with revealed blessings, a complete world, as we spoke about before. Shalom means peace, and shalom means complete or wholeness. So we are only complete when we are at peace. As the saying is so often shouted, no justice, no peace. I pray that we shift from constricted consciousness to redemptive consciousness. Our sages refer to this time as Kulo Shabbat, a complete Shabbat, or Kulo Tov, when darkness will fully be transformed to light, love, justice, and peace. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys next time.